Welcome to ENside Politics, our weekly podcast on two of the things you need to know about San Antonio politics. I'm Greg Jefferson, Metro Editor of the San Antonio Express News. I'm joined today by reporter Madison Iszler. Iszler, right?
Iszler.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Yeah, we were just talking. I never say her last name out loud. Now I am, so I got it right. And our special guest today is Andrew Solano, San Antonio political consultant and a former chief of staff for a bunch of city council members. Welcome.
Yeah, great to be here again.
All right. So I want to pick up on one of the bigger news stories we had last week, which was after 2.5 years of discussions with the city, the San Antonio Spurs finally committed. They finally said how much money they would put up for a new downtown arena. It was about $500 million. But they didn't stop there. They added another $500 million in related development around the footprint of the arena, and about $60 million in as part of a what's known as a community benefit agreement. We can go into all of this in a bit. The interesting thing is what happened on Friday. So City Council met for an update on discussions between the city and the Spurs. And things seem to have gone awry. So, Madison, you were both there, but I'm gonna leave it to the reporter to actually go into what happened Friday afternoon.
Yes, we were both there for more than 5 hours, I think, during the discussion. So basically, City Manager Eric Walsh laid out the Spurs proposal, and Mayor Jones essentially asked the council, do you want to continue negotiations as we've been working on, or do we want to try to get a piece of revenue sharing from the Spurs? The city is facing a major budget deficit. And so she asked her fellow council members, are you interested in trying to figure out a way to get money, essentially?
By the way, so that budget deficit would not be affected at all. There's not going to be an arena for years to come. So, she was kind of talking about it in terms of a budget deficit that they're going to be facing next year and the following year.
Yes, and basically this being an opportunity to look at, is there a way to get a cut of different Spurs revenue sources to try to help plug this hole and get some revenue for the city? And most of her fellow council members didn't really seem interested in that. There was some interest from kind of the smaller progressive contingent, but on the whole, most council members said, we're good as is. Let's continue with the negotiations.
So how did you read that? I mean, one way of looking at that is to say, she wanted to slow down the process. Is that fair to say?
Yeah,
talks between the city and the Spurs?
Yeah, listen, first of all, this was a huge issue on the campaign trail, right? And obviously just coming off of the campaign with Beto Altamirano, this was one of the hottest topics that we would discuss. And if you had told me a year ago that we would be here and having a conversation around $1 billion being contributed from the Spurs, right? And I know we'll get it in the comments. It's 500 to the arena, but 500 in development. And I think it's considerable that you just highlight that, because when you're talking about a TERS, you're talking about the taxable valuation above the baseline. And so if you can essentially have a guarantee of 500 million in development in that area, like you're almost guaranteed, right, that you're going to be able to get some of that back through the TERS. So it's almost like a self-funding, right, mechanism in that sense, which is my understanding. So I think that's considerable. Another 500 from the city, and another 311 now apparently from the county, and none of it's general fund. I would tell you that's a pretty good deal. Right. And now I understand, and I think this is where the mayor's coming from and the council members. Everybody wants to get the best deal possible. Right. And the CBA, the community benefits agreement. I think I will give the mayor some kudos here in the council that, they need to try to get this doesn't happen often. I heard her press conference afterwards, and trying to leverage is important. But I also want to say that I think going into this, and we knew this going in on the mayoral race, that this was going to be the biggest issue that you came into, right? Just because of the way the timeline was, the mayoral election happening in June for a runoff, you have no time during budget, and by, budget's in mid-September, but we're talking about August 18th is a statutory, right? So we knew it was going to be a compacted timeline. And so I think trying to work with your council members was going to be really important, and trying to figure out. And I don't think that happened necessarily because, like Madison said, it did appear that maybe they weren't on the same page. It seemed to be confusion in the room around what the council members, I think most of them, it's fair to say, wanted to continue to try to get the best deal possible, but didn't think it was necessary to say, like, I'm okay moving forward as is and just including that. Like, why wouldn't we include that? Mm-hmm. And then specifically, as the mayor asked for, or verbally say that you want to do revenue sharing. Uh-huh. And so I think there was confusion around that. I think everybody wants to get the best deal possible. But again, I think, if there's meetings taking place and you're all on the same page, it did not feel that was the case.
So, okay. So the mayor is interested in at least talking about the possibility of revenue sharing. Could it be that in kind of focus, I mean, clearly she talked about it during the campaign. It's something she wants to see, but it kind of struck me that there might be an undercurrent of not mistrust is probably not the right word. It's probably too much. But I mean, did you get a sense of what she thought about the city staff's negotiations of this deal on Friday? Is she comfortable with it? Does she want them to be more aggressive?
Yeah, I mean, clearly, at least overtly, she was saying that she wanted to make sure that Eric Walsh, the city manager, there were a handful of times that she looked over there and clarified. Mm-hmm. And having gone through this a lot, and Greg, you've been there, a lot of this stuff just kind of happens, right? During the day-to-day of like Robert's rules. And, so I did think it was interesting, at least to someone like me, who's a nerd and nerds out on this stuff, that there were instances where there seemed to be maybe a lack of a comfort where council members would be talking and the mayor would chime in and say, do you want me to stop the clock so you can make sure you have your time? Like things like that happen just kind of generally. And I think it's a signal to say, hey, I'm trying to help you. I'm on your side, which is, I think, important right now. But in terms of the city manager, I do think that and I want to say, I'm not sure I saw this covered anywhere, but I do think it's interesting that out of all the new faces on council for this term, all of them but Mayor Ortiz Jones has served on a body before, or I'm sorry, not served, but worked, right? So you had District 8, District 4, and District 6 all are former staffers. And so is Misty Spears in 9. She was a county staffer. So I think a lot of these folks have been there on the sidelines as staff and understand the kind of ins and outs of how this stuff works. A lot of this stuff you're briefed on previously. And so it's some of it is just kind of going through the motions when you're on the dais. That's where I think it was most surprising to people. It didn't seem like any of that stuff had happened. It seemed like a stream of consciousness on the dais.
Near the end of the meeting, yeah.
Yeah, where everybody was...
The mayor's talking, and she had this, it seemed to have this quality of talking, kind of thinking out loud, like a stream of consciousness.
Yeah, and maybe, look, that might be refreshing because, but I do think there's a level of this where you've had the briefing. I think there was some like famous incidents in the past where council member may have been called out for not paying attention on the dais, and their response was like, this is the 4th time I've heard this presentation. And so I think there's a balance where if you're having those meetings, staff usually calls them drive-bys, right? Where they come real quick and we'll brief a council member or chief of staff. It doesn't seem like any of that's happened. Now I get it, they're on recess. And so I wouldn't think it's typical, but when you call a special meeting like they did, I would have imagined that there would have been some kind of briefing. It seemed like the council members and the mayor were all seeing this at the same time for the first time. I don't know that to be true. I think there was a memo that was sent out or a presentation like the day before a few council members referenced. But again, I do think that it was interesting that it seemed like many of these questions were being asked for the first time in front of everyone, which I think is good. I think there's some transparency there that people appreciate. But I did get the sense that the mayor certainly wanted to make sure everyone understood that she wanted the manager to do more.
Right. So there seemed to be heading up to this meeting, there seemed to be a sense of urgency. We keep hearing about this August 18th deadline for, Bexar County Commissioner's Court to call a venue tax election to cover, a portion of the arena costs. Mm-hmm. And now it's going to be potentially north of $300 million. But also for the city council to put a bond election on the November ballot for infrastructure projects all around the arena site, just to kind of speed up that project. And yet, you clearly, I think Friday, you had a lot of unanswered questions, and it began to feel, to me anyway, like a fake deadline. Like it was a rush to call an election when clearly there are a lot of unanswered questions, and it seemed to me that that's what the mayor seemed to be getting at. Was it?
Yes, there still are a lot of unanswered questions. And city staff had before talked about the importance of that infrastructure bond and said basically during the public meetings that they held, this is a chance for voters to essentially weigh in, not directly on the arena, but to say, yes, we're good with infrastructure around the arena. And then on Friday, they basically said that's off the table for now, at least. That's in part because of the flooding.
So there's not going to be a November bond election?
The city said they're not recommending that at this point. That's in part because of the flooding. And so Mayor Jones said during the press conference afterward, yes, the optics.
Yeah, it sounds like that's been pushed to maybe May. And I think that's actually helpful probably in the long run to be able to have the counties separate, because I think there's going to be a lot of confusion come November, specifically on the venue tax for the county, because it's very clear, right? If you're selling that campaign to say, hey, this is coming from tourists. This is not coming from anybody here in town, right? Local residents. This is all venue tax. And by the way, it can only be spent on these type of projects. And I think that's also important from the cities when you're talking about the PFZ and all the other funding mechanisms that, and staff was very clear when council members were asking this, that this money can only be spent. So I know there's arguments from opposition that says, hey, you should be spending this money on other stuff. And I don't disagree that money needs to be spent there, but I think most council understands this money can only be spent in these typical type of projects. And so I think having those separate and maybe just having the housing bond in November with some infrastructure around for some of the flooding that's taken place is probably a better set. I will say also what I've been hearing in the community is, and I think this is why some of the council members are pushing to have a better agreement, because there are projects right now that I think are either stalled or have been delayed for TERS money that I think, would be beneficial to certain council areas. So like, for instance, I just read an article about the Magic Theater getting some TERS money for air conditioning and for other, various issues that they've been dealing with. And the construction hasn't helped, right? So I think it's in the Hemisphere footprint. But you've also got folks like the Philharmonic who I think are working at the Scottish Rite now, co-owning that and looking at TERS funding for some accessibility issues there, working with an elevator, that I think council members have been in this space where they've been told, hey, we're going to hold off on that because right now that's tied to Project Marvel. Well, now if you're looking at a May timeline, maybe that money frees up a little bit. And I think council members would be right to ask and try to leverage some of that money for these projects in voting for Project Marvel.
Can I suggest that there may be more than just nerd reasons for postponing this until May, and that being political reasons? Yeah. Like you've got strong opposition from Cops Metro, and you have what appears to be, and Madison did a great story on this a couple of weeks ago, this kind of burgeoning grassroots opposition to Project Marvel and to the Spurs arena. Is Eric Walsh's decision to slow down, do you think, influenced by that? Is he wanting to say, okay, we've got some opposition and we'd be putting ourselves in like a really tight time frame to try to get them turned around?
Yeah, I mean, like I think
we're not going to do that.
I think with anything, political calculation, right? And no one can count to 6 better than Eric Walsh. I think that's something that, again, Mayor Jones is going to have to, if she's not already, trying to figure out where those numbers are. And so I think at the end of the day, like building these relationships and trying to figure out what these council members would like to see in this is helpful. I thought that was an interesting piece that Madison picked up as well when they were talking about the childcare component, right? That
this is in the $60 million for the community benefit.
For the CBA, right? Yeah. And so that the mayor had called for it. And look, we heard it on our campaign that childcare was huge. It was a part of our plan. And we're glad to see that the mayor had also picked up on that. But it was interesting to see some of, I wouldn't term it pushback, but some clarification from council members. It seemed like the majority who said, listen, if childcare is something that the community is interested in, I think we should include it. But the community needs to be included in the community benefits agreement. And so they want to see things. So I don't think it's a done deal.
Just to be clear, I mean, so Gina Ortiz Jones on the campaign trail talked about the city needing to do something about the expense of childcare and expanding pre-K for SA. And it did seem that the Spurs were definitely paying attention because, they had two options for childcare.
Yep.
And I think together, or either one would have been about $35 million.
Yeah.
So they did seem to be trying to make the mayor happy.
To the Spurs' credit, I mean, if that's what you're hearing, and I'm sure, and I, as y'all have reported, that they have met numerous times where I think it would behoove the mayor if this hasn't happened, and I don't know, but it didn't seem to be clear at Friday's meeting was to meet with the council members and say, hey, listen, this is what I'm proposing to the Spurs. Childcare you saw was a part of this citywide. And is that something that you're okay with? I'm going to be presenting that. It did not seem like that happened because there were a number of council members who either danced around it or specifically said, look, childcare may be great and I think we need it, but whether or not that's what the community wants, we want to include it here, things may change in 5 years. And so I think we need to go to the community for the community benefits agreement.
Right. So then it appeared to you that the mayor hadn't really spoken individually with city council.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't seem that way to me, or from sources that I have, that there were those typical one-on-ones. Again, I get it. It's during the summer, so typically council members are traveling or they're out in their districts. But when you call a special meeting, I would imagine. But again, these are just the typical things that you see coming into an office when you have, you're drinking out of a fire hose right now, and you're not. I mean, look, I want to be very clear. I think had everything gone perfect, the mayor knew they were going to be inheriting in this council a very difficult transition, right? I think it's difficult for anyone, but when you add a budget deficit, which is not typical, right? You can probably count on your hand how many times in recent memory that's happened. You have a very the environment at the state and national levels are difficult, and the flooding, and then Project Marvel. Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah. By the way, so we've mentioned a budget deficit a couple of times. We're looking at, the city's looking at a budget deficit in its next budget of north of $30 million. And the year after, I think it's a little higher than $120 million. It gets much worse.
And I've heard the mayor mention 200 plus by 2030.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, so she's talking, it's not surprising then that she's talking about some kind of revenue sharing. But Spurs seem to hate that idea, right?
Yes. Eric Walsh said the Spurs are not interested in revenue sharing, which is interesting in part because on the campaign trail, one of the things that now Mayor Jones talked about was the county's deal with the Spurs, which had a revenue sharing provision, but it didn't really ever yield anything for the county because of the numbers.
Yeah, like the naming rights. They never, they sold the naming rights for, what had been, I think, the Bexar County Center. It became the SBC Global Center, then AT&T Center, now Frost Bank Center. In none of those agreements did the county get anything, is my understanding.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Now, so she's pretty clear about the city wanting to avoid that. Did we get any sense on Friday of, we know what the mayor's asking for. Did we get any sense from Eric Walsh of what the agreement could involve?
Probably not revenue sharing at this point. I mean, he made that clear that the Spurs are not interested in that. He talked about with the $500 million piece with the Spurs, $350 to $500 million that the city, what the city would put in. Mm-hmm. There wasn't a lot of detail on the development piece of the whole thing.
So this is where they're going to put in $500 million.
Yes.
But I mean, we're also seeing NBA teams partner up with private sector, developers like Sands Corporation out of Las Vegas to do related kind of side-by-side development of big new arenas. But we don't know whether the Spurs are talking with some development partner.
They are talking at this point, but they haven't picked a development partner yet. Okay. But there are certainly conversations happening. What that could look like is still pretty fuzzy. Do they want to build a hotel, next to the arena for visiting teams, say? Do they want to do some things with housing, with restaurants? They clearly want it to be different than the Frost Bank Center, which is by itself. There's
that's part of the reason they want to be downtown. I mean, they're at a facility now that just doesn't have much around it, unless you want to go to a Spurs game and then go play municipal golf. Right. There's not a lot to do out there. Now, that you mentioned the $1 billion figure from the Spurs, right? And it's $500 million that they've committed for the arena, and this $500 million for related development. So stuff that's going to go up next to an arena. Do you think that commitment, basically 40% of the overall cost, changes the political calculus for whatever goes to voters, whether you're talking about the Bexar County election in November for the venue tax or looking ahead to May to this bond issue for infrastructure projects. Does the Spurs commitment help the city make that case? Did it just get easier to win that election?
Yeah. Well, let me be clear. I think the county, first and foremost, credit where it's due, I think has been as clear as they can be given the circumstances on the information they've had, also having to deal with the city's election and figure out who's going to lead the city in the mayoral race, and then just try to figure out and work through that, right? So to their credit, I think the venue tax, it sounds like August 5th, if they still stick with that date to put it on the ballot, would go to the county, for the initiative in November. And then, so that calculus, I think, is very clear, right? And it's a lot more black and white than I think the cities, because again, it's venue tax, it's being paid by tourists, and it's not coming from your general fund. And it can only go to these projects. The cities was a lot murkier, I think, if you do keep it for November, because you had all these other votes that are going to have to take place by council, which really it's not clear that there is like some kind of self-imposed deadline other than the August 18th state deadline. But if you're talking about voting to allow the $500 million, up to $500 million for the PFZ and the TERS and all that, that's not going to voters. The general obligation bonds, which is what we're talking about, the $250 million there, I think is interesting, because I think you do have to take that to the public. Ben Grizel mentioned specifically, I think to Councilman Mark White, that anytime a sports complex is involved in that funding that for general obligation bonds, you have to go to vote. And so if that's being pushed to May, I think that makes it a lot more of an easier sell, I think, politically. And also just make sure that the public knows, look, regardless if it was the arena or anything, like the actual work, the utilities, the road work around the access road for 37, all of that has to get done regardless. And so I really think it's critical for listeners to understand too, that it's all about offset. And I think that's where I think the council members can really be savvy and smart with how they do this. In other words, my point is, when you talk about revenue sharing, yes, if the NBA bars that, or if there's some legal reason why you can't do revenue sharing, then what you would say is offsetting, right? So if the city's going to go pay for something anyway, and the Spurs say, but we can take care of that, whether it's development, whether it's, any other of these pots of money, then it's the same thing, right? I mean, it's money that you don't have to spend as a city out of your general fund that you would have had to otherwise. And so I think it's important to keep those in mind when you're talking about specifically the infrastructure, because that stuff has to get done regardless. And it's a considerable amount, as we've seen. And so to have someone else saying, hey, we're going to take care of the 500 in development, because the other thing that's important is the TERS doesn't make money, right, if there's no development happening. And so the fact that you have a guaranteed really like $1.5 billion worth of development, then that means that TERS is going to be taken in money. And I think Ben got to this point where a couple of council members were asking if money
Ben
comes
Gorzel, by the way, is the city's CFO, Chief Financial Officer.
Yeah. And so the more money that comes in and the quicker it comes in, I understand that they can pay that off sooner. And I think a couple of council members asked Ben that question, what happens then? And he said, essentially, like, we're guaranteeing to pay for that and the debt, but if we can pay it off sooner, then that money can go to other things. And so having a guaranteed development, I think, is really critical. That's not getting talked about enough. And I think it's up to the council and the mayor and the city staff to go out and sell that point. But that's why it's so important to have campaigns around this that are clear. I know there has been some pushback in some of the reporting and I went to one of the meetings in District 10 where I think there was a lot trying to be done. But at the end of the day, this has to be about public participation, public involvement, and really having the community stakeholders at the table. Because if they feel like this is a done deal, they're just coming and hearing that this is already done, then you're going to have. I mean, if
you've got a draft term sheet, right?
Yeah.
Isn't the deal already done? I mean, it seems like it seems a little disingenuous to say that there's still an opportunity for the community to weigh in if you've nearly got a term sheet nailed down. Now, is that one of the points the mayor was trying to make on Friday or not?
Yeah, I mean, it was a little ambiguous to me. I kind of felt like the underlying for everybody was that this was rushed. You had a couple of council members say, we wish we would have started this sooner. But I think because you had an election, like the timing was just terrible, and there was nothing anyone could do about that. And so I think, again, coming in and trying to do the most with what you have, I think was really important.
But couldn't you have said, okay, there's an election, there's an election, and that nobody at City Hall is really going to be talking much publicly about Project Marvel. They hadn't really done much talking anyway, but definitely during an election, they're unlikely to. They knew that. Mm-hmm. So why create this kind of artificial time crisis where it's like, oh my God, you've only got a couple of weeks, you got to call. I mean, why didn't the city just say, okay, well, we'll do it, we'll look at May 2026.
Yeah. I think you have to try. I think you have to see what sticks, and maybe politically, you want it done sooner. I mean, certainty, I think for every party involved, right, you want to make sure you can. And so pushing it out is scary, I would imagine, if you're any of the parties, especially the Spurs, but I think having some guarantees, and look, I mean, I think so much of this, and people hate to think about this, but I mean, so much about this and the political piece is optics. And so I think you have to show the community, if you're the mayor, if you're these council members, I do think it's interesting to think about how this might be a little different considering they have now 4 years. There's less maybe repercussions. But I do think that ultimately, time is of the essence, and the NBA, I'm sure, wants to see things firm and played out. But there's that conflict internally between, if you're meeting and the Cops Metro folks like we do, right, they want as much as possible. So there's these kind of two conflicting, narratives happening at the same time. And I think the mayor is trying to do her best to navigate those. But at the same time, I don't know if all the council members are on the same page.
Right. So what is it that city council doesn't know yet? So there are going to be a couple of big things, a couple of reports they get this week. What are those going to include?
Yes, one of the big ones is an economic impact analysis of Project Marvel, not just the arena, but the bigger picture, which would involve a renovated Alamo Dome, a bigger convention center, maybe a second convention center hotel, redoing the John Wood Courthouse, a bunch of different projects. And so a couple of the council members during Friday's meeting mentioned that they really want more detail on that as they're trying to figure out the details of the term sheet with the Spurs. And the other piece is basically a consolidation of what the city heard at the public meetings they've hosted. You went to one, I went to D2. And so a couple of council members also mentioned that they want to know, what does the community want to see out of this deal? What specific projects are they interested in? At D2, I heard a lot about affordable housing and the Frost Bank Center. What's going to happen to the Frost Bank Center? I think the affordable housing piece was to some degree reflected in the community benefits conversation on Friday. A couple of council members said, maybe the community wants childcare, but maybe they want affordable housing. That's something we heard. Yeah. So they're supposed to get both of those this next week.
Okay. Now, again, you were at the meeting on Friday. Just kind of generally, what did that tell you about what kind of Mayor Jones is going to be? What did you learn about her performance Friday?
Man, look, as I've said a couple of times now, I mean, it would be difficult for anyone who's stepping into this position because of most of the circumstances that are out of their control, right? And so I think the mayor is trying to do her best given those circumstances. I think I don't know of too many people that would argue that it has been a fairly, difficult couple of first weeks or months. I think
how?
I mean, just in terms of what we've seen, the memo from the council members around the council consideration request, CCRs, that the mayor authored and sent to council. And I think that goes back to my point earlier. Again, it appears to me, having worked on a lot of those CCRs and the process, that, the council members have not been consulted, which is...
So what is it that she's proposing? Like, how does she want to change the policy making apparatus at City Hall?
Yeah, I mean, so CCRs, as others on this podcast have talked about, are basically the vehicle that City Council in San Antonio uses to get our version of laws, right? Our policies enacted, right? And so in order to do that in the past, you've had to get, 4 other council members of your colleagues to sign up a memo sent to the mayor, city manager, city attorney, and a couple of other folks saying, hey, we want this particular issue to be discussed at governance, right, which is the only committee the mayor sits on, and kind of starts the process of it going through and getting due diligence done by the city, eventually on its way to other committees and then council, right, to vote on. Oddly enough, this issue had been worked on for the last year by Mayor Nuremberg with staff and the council members, precisely because they felt like it was already kind of too cumbersome and things weren't happening quick enough. And so there was a whole process, right? And so I think it's interesting to me that the mayor maybe didn't necessarily pick up, or there was no one to really say, hey, listen, this had just been worked on. But again, if you're meeting with council, I know that would have come up because this was said in their memo and subsequent op-ed that they authored that they weren't considered in this, right? And so I think there was, from what I had been hearing,
was Terry Castillo, Marina Aldrete Gavito, and Mark White. They wrote a guest editorial for the Express News, kind of chastising the mayor for kind of clamping down on this process.
Right? You can't say it was like one or the other. I mean, in terms of like you've got two women and a man. You've got ideologically the spectrum. Like everything's covered.
In Terry Castillo and Mark White, you've got kind of the far left and the far right on
and Marina covering the middle, right?
Yeah, right?
And so I mean, you have like every base covered, and so it was a little surprising to me that this was the issue. I kind of had a feeling that this procedural kind of stuff, the minutia was going to trip up because again, it's really difficult to navigate. I didn't think it was going to be the CCR because again, a lot of us assumed because it had just been worked on. That being said, I do think it's a big deal because the council pushing back this early is something I've never seen before.
Any of these tensions on display Friday? I mean, totally unrelated, but I mean, it can clearly have a bearing on how you.
No, I mean, I didn't pick up on anything overt about that. It just again kind of seemed to be the same issue.
I was watching the live stream, and I might have missed something really important here, but near the end of her comments, Mayor Jones kind of stopped. And, and apparently Mark White had committed some kind of face crime, right? Like he had.
Is that what you're calling it?
Yeah, he committed a face crime. The meeting came crashing to a halt as the mayor, and you can maybe help me with the wording. It's like, do you have a problem? You made a face, something like that.
Yeah.
And it took forever to get back into the groove of the meeting. What was that about? Like I wasn't in the room, so maybe I missed something.
No, I mean, you described it as we experienced it. I think we were all kind of taken aback at what was happening. We didn't understand. It was like in the middle, I think, of the mayor speaking, and it seemed like she recognized that maybe we term it like resting Mark face. I don't know. But I don't know if it was that.
We don't. Maybe. I mean, I would stop a meeting for that face.
Yeah. But no, it seemed like maybe he was, like most of us are when you're listening to somebody and you kind of have a facial expression you don't realize, and he was intently listening. But the mayor, I think, did what a lot of us maybe wouldn't, which is call him out and say, hey, what's wrong? And I think he seemed shocked. It was like maybe a few seconds where he's like, I don't know. I was just listening to you speak. And so it was very awkward. And I think I'm still picking up on those kind of things. Where,
I mean, it's worth noting that at a previous meeting, she was wrapping it up, and he was gathering his things and standing up, and she called him out. She said, Councilman White, can you please wait for a really unusual move that like no prior mayor that I can think of would have made. Can you take that and then lump it together with his face crime and say, they might not have the best relationship?
Listen, it is pretty ridiculous that we have to talk about things, or maybe people are going to say you don't have to. And I will say, I agree. It really doesn't matter if the mayor wants to be called, a certain way in her title. She has earned that. It doesn't really matter if she's telling folks to not have their cell phones. Like, I get it. It sounds silly. It's a very easy, to say, well, why are we caring about things that, otherwise we wouldn't? Here's why it matters, though, in the context, is that ultimately you need to get to 6. Everything we've just talked about here is getting to 6 votes. And as mayor, your primary task is whipping, right, or getting those council members to say yes to something that you want. Example A, childcare in the CBA. If council members are pushing back, it's clear to me that maybe that hasn't been done. And all those things that we're talking about, telling people to sit down, telling people that, like, it's not ingratiating yourself. It's not saying, hey, I want to build a relationship. And so I think council members who are going to be pushing back, that's where it matters. Like, no, it doesn't ultimately matter, but I think to some, what they're picking up on is what I'm hearing from council folks are, like we want someone who we know is a teammate and can work collaboratively.
Not a school marm.
Yeah. And I think ultimately that's why it matters. You have to look at it in the context of, like, ultimately this job, politics, is getting people to like you. And if it's difficult to do that and you're making it difficult, then that's ultimately on you. That is a decision that is made that says, I would rather the formality be more important right now than making friends. But I think the problem in that is that formality doesn't win you votes on the council dais. Yeah. It's those relationships that you build.
Right. Now, there was one council member who did not attend Friday's meeting, Evelise Mesa Gonzalez, because late Thursday night, just after 11 o'clock, she was driving home from the Center Club downtown, which kind of bills itself as kind of the place where kind of the emerging leadership of San Antonio meets the establishment, the entrenched leadership. It's basically a bar and restaurant, right? I've never actually been. Yeah. I'm sure you have.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's lovely.
It's lovely.
Anyway, so she left there just maybe a little before 11, was pulled over on Interstate 10, was arrested for DWI. This is the third, she makes the third city council member in the last 3 years to be arrested for driving while intoxicated. And I don't know that there's that much to say about it, but it's appalling to me. I mean, like, what do you think? Is there something about the culture of city council? Is there a kind of permissiveness that enables this kind of behavior?
Yeah, look, it's a very serious issue. I do feel for the councilwoman and her family and staff, but ultimately these are decisions that we're all adults and that we make. And I think it's newsworthy, obviously, but I also think, knowing that this is an issue that the 3 or 2 other council members, like, I know that has to go through the folks' minds. It's only been a little over a month since being in office. And so I think for most voters, they're going to be, it's going to be difficult for them to wrap their head around how could this have happened. And look, I'll speak from my perspective as almost, a career staffer, that there's only so much you can do, right, to protect those who you work for. I think for those of us who do this line of work, it's especially important and more sensitive. I've been in situations where, yes, we're human and you go out and you have a drink, but just knowing that, you're an elected official, you are going to be held to a higher standard. And look, the councilwoman said this in her comments and owned it. I think so she got some credit there.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to say. I mean, it's like, look, it's this is a charge. It's not, we don't know what the Bexar County District Attorney is going to do with it. We don't know if it would stand up in court. We just don't know enough. We do know that she refused to take a field sobriety test. So there was, she was required through, a warrant to get a blood draw. We don't have the results of that. So we don't know the status of her case, whether she was guilty or not. She did come out of the county lockup early Friday afternoon, made a statement in which she didn't say, yes, I did it, but she said, it's like, I disappointed, I'm sorry. I don't know that she actually said that, but she said, city officials are held to a higher standard, and she failed to meet that standard. And she acknowledged that she disappointed constituents, family. Herself.
Which I think is the right thing to say. And yes, you're innocent until proven guilty. But I do think, again, I'm going to go back to this, sound like a broken record. in politics, it's about optics. And sometimes even if there's an issue, you do have to hold yourself to a higher standard because ultimately the voters will. And this is like just common sense 101. And so, yeah, even if it comes out that she, wasn't intoxicated, and there might have been another reason why what was observed was happening by the police officer, you've put yourself in a position now. And unfortunately, but everybody knows this going in if you're running for office. Yeah. Right. And so.
Right. Now, the police report, the SAPD released after her arrest, the officer did note kind of a moderate smell of alcohol coming from her. Said she was staggering a little bit and slurring her words. So that was the police officer's observations. Like I said, we don't know. It's too early to say how this is going to play out. But I mean, what would you expect to see at City Hall, like on City Council? With Mark White and Clayton Perry in District 10, those were the two previous, in the last 3 years, council members who were arrested for DWI. In both cases, there were various kinds of censure votes. Would you expect something similar in this case?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to look at the past as an indicator. I think. You might consider, Councilman Perry used to be a little bit, worse in terms of like what happened. And ultimately, he paid the price that he was required to.
Yeah. I mean, basically, he was accused of driving while intoxicated and fleeing the scene of an accident.
So, I mean, not that there's like degrees to any of these, like they're all bad and you shouldn't do them and they've acknowledged that. But I will say, look, looking at past history as an indication. However, I do think there's a wrinkle in that, again, what we've talked about with Mayor Jones is that, formality and kind of coming in a more rigid sense. It's been made comments about like the military and how she's running things. It wouldn't surprise me if there was maybe a harder stance taken to say, look, this is like, I'm the mayor now and we are not going to do this. And like, I don't want to say to make an example of, but it might not be the same as what we saw with Mayor Nirenberg and the council at the time. Right. But I also do think that there's the 4-year term now. This is so early in that. And it would be surprising to me if any other action, the censure or outside of the censure that would take place, or what the councilwoman, I have no indication on what she may want to do.
Right. So on Friday, the mayor did decline to comment on her arrest, on Mesa Gonzalez's arrest. We're recording this Monday morning. It's going to be kind of published, released Tuesday morning. Who knows what's going to happen?
Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, it could be the mayor will step up and say, "Here's the date of the censure vote." Yeah. I'm going to leave it at that. Andrew Solano, thank you very much.
Yeah,
great talking to you. And please catch us again next week. If you've not signed up for ENside Politics, the newsletter, drop down to show notes. Click that thing and sign up. Thank you very much. We'll see you next week.